May 6, 1996, Charles County, Maryland, the Wicomico River. Kevin Ackers, 29, an unemployed carpenter from Cobb Island, takes his family out on the water for the afternoon. Wife, 2 kids, motorboat. It's a calm day. He rounds a bend where the Neal Sound bleeds into the Wicomico and sees a pale shape rising against the dark water. It's a body, face down, suit jacket on, khaki trouser, eyeglasses still in place. Kevin sends his family below and picks up the radio. Charles County Sheriff is 20 minutes out, and he's drifting next to a corpse and has no idea who he just found. They eventually identify him as William Egan Colby. Now, 20 years ago, he was the director of the Central Intelligence Agency. Now, 9 days earlier, at a cottage at Rock Point, Maryland, a 76-year-old man drives down from D.C. in a red Fiat. He stops at Captain John's for clams and corn, calls his wife Sally in Houston around 7, tells her he's tired and going to bed early. Now, caretaker Carol Wise sees him watering willow trees down by the water at 7:15, and that's the last time anyone sees him. Now, Monday morning, neighbor Alice Stokes notes that the red Fiat's still in the driveway. She knocks, but no answer, so she walks the property. Now, through the window, she sees a dinner plate on the table, half a clam left, half the corn. The radio's playing, the computer's on. She sees a wallet, shoes inside. The screen door's unlocked. And there's an aluminum ladder leaning into the water at the dock with a frayed length of rope hanging from one of the iron rungs. The canoe is gone. Now, 9 days of searching, Charles County Sheriff, Maryland State Police, Coast Guard, dive teams. The canoe's found first. It's swamped, half submerged, 200 yards from the cottage. They find the paddle and a life vest scattered along the shore. Now, the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner of Maryland determines the cause of death to be drowning or hypothermia after a cardiovascular incident. So, an accident. Case closed. Well, not really, because it's kind of sus that this 76-year-old man went paddling alone in the dark in dress clothes on a cold night in April with no life vest. Now, common sense. Even stranger, the body didn't blow up, even after 9 days in the water. The dinner interrupted and the unlocked screen door makes this look like something other than a mere accident. And this wasn't just a retired federal officer. This was a man who 23 years earlier exposed every secret the Central Intelligence Agency had been hiding for 2 decades. The man who built the CIA's Phoenix program in Vietnam. The man whose firing was personally directed by Henry Kissinger. The man who, in the weeks before he was found floating in the river, wrote a letter to the Attorney General of the United States about a credit union executive in Nebraska. And that man told his closest colleague just months before he died, you have to consider the possibility of some danger not only to your reputation, but to your person. I'm John Genoa, and you're watching America's Strangest History, coming at you live from the great state of Vermont. This is the director who knew too much. Stay with me. Stockholm, 1952. There's a basement room somewhere in the Swedish capital. It's a quiet residential block in the diplomatic quarter. We see crates stacked floor to ceiling. Inside the crates, World War II supplies, weapons from American stockpiles, M3 grease guns, pistols, plastic explosives wrapped in brown paper, detonators, pools of fuse wire, stacks of forged Swedish passports, also maps of bridges, rail lines, and Soviet supply routes through Finland. It's all meticulously marked in red ink. We find lists of names typed on onion skin paper, and Swedish citizens, hundreds of them, thousands. These are ordinary people, teachers, farmers, dock workers, engineers. They're trained at night, on weekends, in vacation cabins in the woods. They're trained to assassinate Soviet officers, blow up bridges, ambush Red Army convoys, and unalive collaborators in their own country if Moscow ever rolled west. And the Swedish government has no idea they exist. Curious. Sweden's officially neutral, hasn't been to war in over 100 years. The whole national identity is built around staying out of other people's fights. But somebody decided to give Stockholm a secret army anyway. The 32-year-old American running the operation walks under a State Department cover. Foreign service officer at the American Embassy. Catholic family, wife Barbara, 3 kids with another on the way. His name's William Egan Colby. And this is just the beginning. So who is this guy? How does an Ivy League lawyer with a silver star end up running a clandestine army in a neutral country? Why is the United States government training Swedish dock workers to commit acts of war? Well, we gotta go back. William Egan Colby is born in St. Paul, Minnesota, January 1st, 1920. Father's a U.S. Army colonel, eventually a history professor at Brown. The family moves all over: Tianjin, Atlanta, Fort Benning. Bill goes to French Catholic schools in China and high school right here in Burlington, Vermont. When he's 16, his father takes him to Italy, Mussolini's Italy, fascist Italy. The kid sees black shirts in the streets, sees what authoritarianism actually looks like up close. Now that trip radicalizes him against any system of any flavor that crushes individual freedom. Princeton class of 1940, Columbia Law is next on the list, then Pearl Harbor. Colby's already in the Army by then. Signed up for the ROTC at Princeton, becomes a paratrooper, makes it through Fort Benning jump school, and in 1943 gets pulled aside for something special. The Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, Wild Bill Donovan's outfit, the wartime ancestor of the CIA. Colby joins a unit called Jedburghs. 3-man teams, 1 American, 1 British, 1 Frenchman, parachuted behind German lines to organize resistance fighters and coordinate sabotage. The mission is to disrupt the Wehrmacht, blow rail lines, ambush patrols, buy time for Allied advance. Now, the night of August 14th, 1944, Colby and his team jump from a B-24 Liberator into occupied France. The drop zone is a clearing near Montazi, about 60 miles south of France. Wind drift carries him off course, and he lands in a ditch in the dark. He hides under a hedge for 2 hours, waiting for German patrols to pass. Now, by dawn, he regroups with his teammates at a local maquis cell. Over the next 5 weeks, he's running gunfights through the orchards of central France. He's setting ambushes on German supply columns. He's sabotaging telephone lines. He's living in a farmhouse while SS patrols sweep the countryside looking for him. In September 1944, Allied tanks roll through. Mission complete. Colby goes home a hero for about 4 months. January 1945, the Battle of the Bulge just ended. The Germans are pulling back into Germany, and the war in Europe's effectively over. Or so everybody thinks, except for Norway. 150,000 German troops are still occupying Norway. If they manage to evacuate south to reinforce Berlin, if they can blow the bridges and the rail lines that the Allied troops would need to push into Germany, the war could drag on for months or longer. So somebody's got to stop them. Operation Ripe. OSS sends Colby back in, Norway this time. March 24th, 1945, he drops from B-24 onto a frozen lake 80 miles from the Swedish border, deep in occupied Norwegian territory. Snow up to his knees. Now his mission, take a team of Norwegian-American commandos nicknamed the Ripe Boys, after the Norwegian word for a kind of mountain bird, and blow the Nordland Railway. Choke the Germans' evacuation route. The team's supposed to be 16 guys. Half of them never arrive. Their planes get shot down or rerouted or crashed in storms. Colby loses 4 airmen in a single supply drop when the plane goes down in the mountains. He has to leave the bodies and continue. They make it to the rail line, they blow up the bridges, and the Germans never get out. For Operation Ripe, Colby gets the Silver Star. The French give him the Croix de Guerre. Norway names a street after him. He's 25 years old. Colby goes back to Columbia Law and finishes his degree, joins Donovan's old law firm in New York, and starts practicing corporate law. He hates it. He's bored sitting in a conference room watching partners argue over commercial contracts. The hero of Operation Ripe is filing paperwork. In 1950, when an old OSS buddy reaches out and asks Bill if he might be interested in a different type of work, Colby doesn't hesitate. The CIA's been operational for 3 years. The Korean War's just started, and somewhere in Washington, somebody decided to take the wartime sabotage doctrine and aim it at a new enemy. Colby's first overseas posting comes in 1951, Stockholm. Now, we already talked about what happened in Stockholm. The crates, the lists, the Swedish dockworkers learning to unalive Russians. But it's bigger than just Sweden. The program has a name, Operation Gladio. Comes from the Latin word for a Roman short sword carried by legionnaires. The naming's on purpose. This is a continent-wide operation. Every Western European NATO member has one. Italy, France, Belgium, Greece, Norway, Denmark, Netherlands, West Germany, and Sweden, which is technically not part of NATO, but gets treated like one for the purposes of the program. The official cover story? If the Soviets ever roll west across the German plain, Gladio operatives are pre-positioned, pre-trained, and pre-armed to wage guerrilla war in their own countries until NATO can liberate them. That's the cover story. The reality? It's more flexible. In Italy, Gladio operatives end up implicated in domestic terrorism years later. Things like bombings, kidnappings, false flag attacks blamed on political enemies to justify crackdowns on the Italian Communist Party. In Belgium, Gladio's been linked to the Brabant supermarket killings. In Turkey, the stay-behind networks get folded into the counter-guerrilla apparatus that participates in actual coups. But none of that happened yet. In 1951, in 1952, when Colby's recruiting Swedish operatives in that basement, it's still pure Cold War prep. Per Randall Wood's definitive biography, Shadow Men, quote, Sweden's stay-behind network grew to anywhere between 1 and 2,000 operatives during the time Colby worked in Stockholm. Got that? Anywhere from 1 to 2,000 Swedish citizens, unknown to their own government, armed and trained by the CIA, ready to go to war, and they spent 3 years building it. In 1953, Colby gets reassigned, Rome Station. His new ambassador is the legendary Claire Booth Luce, playwright, former congresswoman, wife of Time Life publisher Henry Luce, the most famous American woman in Italian diplomacy. And Italy's the front line of the Cold War in Western Europe. The Italian Communist Party, the PCI, is the largest communist party in the communist world. They're polling around 30% nationally, and they're organized, they're disciplined, they're increasingly mainstream. If the PCI wins a legitimate election in a NATO member state, the strategic implications are catastrophic for Washington. But Italy doesn't have legitimate elections. Not exactly, anyway. The CIA pumps millions of dollars into the Christian Democratic Party. They fund Catholic priests to denounce communism from the pulpit. They subsidize newspapers. They bribe trade union officials. They run smear campaigns against PCI candidates. They place stories in friendly newspapers and pay journalists to write specific articles on specific deadlines. Colby's the deputy chief of station, then the chief of station, and for 5 years, 1953 to 1958, he runs the largest covert political operation the CIA has yet attempted, larger than anything in Stockholm, larger than anything in Latin America, and he's good at it. The 1958 Italian election is considered one of the CIA's signature Cold War achievements. The Christian Democrats win. The PCI is contained. Italy stays in NATO. But what Colby learns in Italy is going to define everything that comes after. A democracy can be subverted by a foreign intelligence service through covert action if the operation's patient enough, if it's well funded enough, and if it's well disciplined. The line between supporting friendly democracy and rigging elections is mostly imaginary. And by the time he leaves Rome in 1959, William Colby has gone from a hero who jumped behind Nazi lines to liberate occupied France to the man who taught the CIA how to overthrow democratic outcomes without firing a shot. His next posting is in Saigon, and he's about to learn how to unalive people for a living. Quang Nang Province, South Vietnam, 1968, 3 a.m. A door explodes inward. 8 Vietnamese men in black pajamas pour into a small farmhouse. They're carrying American silenced .45 pistols and Soviet-pattern AK rifles. Flashlights sweep the bedroom. The wife is screaming. Her husband, a village teacher in his 20s, gets pulled out of bed in his underwear and dragged outside. Hands behind his head, he's forced to kneel in the dirt in front of his own home. The team leader flips through a clipboard. They compare a photograph on the page to the man kneeling and nods. 2 shots from a silenced .45. The team disappears into the night. Total time on target, 4 minutes. The next morning, the report goes up the chain. Quote, target neutralized, status, confirmed VCI political cadre, method, ambush. End quote. This is happening hundreds of times a week across South Vietnam. The American name for the program is Operation Phoenix. The Vietnamese name is Phong Hoang, Flying Phoenix. It's an allusion to a mythical bird that sees everything. It started in 1967, fully operational in mid-1968. It's run jointly by the CIA, the Saigon government, and the U.S. Military Command in Vietnam, MACV. The stated mission is to identify the Viet Cong infrastructure, the VCI, and neutralize it. The VCI isn't the Viet Cong soldiers fighting Americans in the jungle. The VCI is the political and administrative apparatus that's running the insurgency at the village level, like tax collectors, propagandists, recruiters, village political officials. Neutralize means unalive, capture, forced to switch sides. The numbers are documented in primary sources. A New York Times article on July 15, 1971 reported that 26,843 non-military Viet Cong insurgents and sympathizers had been neutralized in just 14 months under Phoenix. 4 days after that story ran, William Colby testified under oath to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Now, by his own accounting, the Phoenix program killed 20,587 Vietnamese, captured 28,978, and forced 17,717 to switch sides. Colby built the program. He ran it on the ground from 1968 to 1971. He defended it under oath from 1971 until the day he died. His name appears on every page of the CIA's internal Phoenix Doctrine. Now, how does a Vietnamese citizen end up on a Phoenix target list? Well, the lists are compiled by local Vietnamese intelligence officers, Army Republic of Vietnam officers, South Vietnamese National Police, American military intelligence advisors, and sometimes the next-door neighbor with a grudge. A name gets added to the Phoenix target list along with biographical data and a photo if one's available. The lists are then compiled into computer printouts and shipped down to the provinces. And here's how one American Phoenix advisor described the printouts under oath. We'd get them sporadically, 50 names per page, 6 inches thick. That's the size of the kill list. 50 names per page, 6 inches thick in a single province. No warrants, no trials, no verification. It's as simple as a Vietnamese name appears on a list and the team is sent. The teams have a name. They're called the Provincial Reconnaissance Units, PRUs. About 4,000 PRU operatives at the program's peak. Vietnamese irregulars trained, equipped, funded entirely by the CIA. Many of them are former Viet Cong themselves. They're flipped, they're paid, they're turned loose against their former comrades. They wear black pajamas to look like ordinary villagers. They carry captured Viet Cong weapons and operate at night. And they get paid per body. According to declassified CIA records, a PRU operative could earn roughly $250 American at 1969 conversion rates for the neutralization of a high-value target. Now, every province has a monthly quota. The 1970 nationwide quota was 1,800 neutralizations per month. So to hit the quota, you have to fill the bag, however and with whoever you can. August 1971, Washington, D.C., a former military intelligence specialist named K. Barton Osborne sits before the House Subcommittee investigating Vietnamese operations. Osborne spent 18 months in Vietnam attached to the 525th Military Intelligence Group. He ran PRU agent networks in the same Quang Nang province where our village raid took place at the start of the segment. He's a Phoenix whistleblower, and he's about to describe what he saw under oath. He says, "I never knew of an individual to be detained as a VC suspect who ever lived through an interrogation in a year and a half, and that included quite a number of individuals." So a congressman asks Osborne to be more specific. His answer? They all died. There was never any reasonable establishment of the fact that any one of those individuals was, in fact, cooperating with the VC, but they all died. And the majority died during interrogation or were thrown from helicopters. That's what he said. And it's not a metaphor. That's a documented Phoenix interrogation method. A detainee is taken up 5,000 feet in a Huey gunship. One is pushed out of the open door. The others on board talk fast. Osborne and the Phoenix witnesses describe more methods under oath. Methods include a 6-inch wooden dowel driven through the ear canal, Vietnamese suspects held in cages without food, electrical interrogations rigged with U.S. Army field telephones, improvised waterboards built into provincial interrogation centers. And these aren't isolated incidents. This is the standard operating procedure. Binh Dinh Province, summer 1972, a CIA contractor named Jeff Fulcher later describes what was happening in his province over a 2-month period that summer. He says the disappearance of 30,000 occurred over a 2-month period beginning in June, mainly through roundups like in the Ukraine. The MSS, the South Vietnamese Military Security Service, was putting people in camps. Everyone was turning against the GVN. Anyone born in Binh Dinh was considered VC. There were My Lai by the score from aerial bombardments and artillery. Phoenix coordinated it. He keeps going. The Vietnamese Air Force loaded them up, flew them away, and came back empty. they dumped whole families into the Gulf of Tonkin. So 30,000 Vietnamese, mostly civilians, disappeared in 2 months. They're flown out over the South China Sea by Vietnamese Air Force aircraft and dropped from the air. Phoenix coordinated it. And this is only one province out of 44. So what does William Colby say about all this? He testifies before Congress in July 1971, the same month that the New York Times runs the body counts. His position is careful. He says, quote, "Abuses unquestionably did take place, but the full truth is that Phoenix went far to eliminate them as an accepted aspect of the war." Translation, he admits that the abuses happened, but claims Phoenix was the institution trying to bring law and order to a counterinsurgency that would have been even worse without it. That's his defense. His own memoir, Honorable Men, devotes 30 pages to defending the program. He argues that prior to Phoenix, Vietnamese counterinsurgency was uncoordinated, brutal, and lawless. Phoenix, in his telling, imposed paperwork, procedures, due process, and legal review. He's asked under oath whether anyone in the Phoenix program was wrongly killed. He refuses to say no. His exact answer is, "I cannot be sure." The New York Times runs that admission as a headline the very next day. Colby's home phone, which he refuses to take off the public listing, starts ringing with obscene callers day and night. Here's the part Colby never says in public. The Italian playbook that he built in Rome, covert payments, false flag operations, blacklists, target intimidations, it's the doctrinal foundation for Phoenix. The same playbook that kept the Italian Communist Party from winning a NATO election in 1958 gets industrialized in Vietnam a decade later. Stockholm taught him that secret armies can be built inside neutral democracies. Italy taught him that political enemies can be erased through covert action. Phoenix takes both lessons and applies them in a war zone on a scale that produces tens of thousands of deaths. This is the resume Colby carries back to Washington in the summer of 1971. The hero of Operation Ripe, the architect of Phoenix, the man with 20,587 names on a ledger that he personally defended on national television. In May 1973, a new director walks into CIA headquarters at Langley. His name's James Schlesinger, and he calls Colby in for a meeting. Schlesinger decided that the agency needs to do a complete internal accounting. So every illegal activity, every improper operation, every abuse going back 25 years, he wants it all. He wants it all in writing, and he wants Colby to compile it. So Colby gets to work. Senior officers start walking into his office at Langley. They drop manila folders onto his desk and leave. Memos from the 50s, the 60s, the 70s. Operation the public's never heard of. Names that don't appear in any newspaper or any congressional record. None of it is known to Congress. Not a single American taxpayer who funded it knows it exists. And inside the building, the growing file picks up a nickname, the Family Jewels. The compilation takes 14 months. And by the time it's done, the file runs 683 pages, stamped secret eyes only, and represents the most damaging internal accounting of the history of American intelligence. The cover memo opens in language so careful you can practically taste the lawyer who wrote it. The author notes that the activities documented inside, quote, may possibly fall within the provisions of the National Security Act of 1947, which in plain English means these things were probably crimes. Then comes the phrase that gives the document its insider name. The memo states that 14 years of these activities still have, quote, viable flap potential because the people who carried them out are still alive. Now, translation, if this leaks, somebody's going to prison. So what's actually inside? Well, 18 categories. Let me walk you through a few. Miami Beach, April 1961. In a hotel suite somewhere along Collins Avenue, a 51-year-old Sicilian American named Johnny Roselli takes a meeting with a former FBI agent named Robert Maheu. Maheu's working on contract for the Central Intelligence Agency. He hands Roselli a small glass vial containing 6 lethal pills that are designed to dissolve in food and drink without taste. Maheu's instructions are simple. Get these to a contact inside Cuba who will deliver them to Fidel Castro. Roselli takes the vial. The meeting takes about 4 minutes, but the pills never reach Castro. The Cuban contact gets cold feet, but the agency tries again and again. Over the next 2 years, the CIA runs at least 5 separate plots to unalive Castro through mafia connections. They bring in Sam Giancana, head of the Chicago outfit. They bring in Santo Trafficante, head of the Tampa outfit. They prepare exploding cigars. They prepare exploding seashells designed to detonate when Castro picks it up while scuba diving. They prepare a wetsuit treated with chemical compounds to make his beard fall off as a humiliation campaign. Now, I'm not making this up. None of these plots succeed, but for a 2-year stretch, 3 of the most powerful organized crime bosses in American history are on the payroll of the United States government for assassination contracts. This is item number 1 in the file. Item number 2, from March 12th to June 15th of 1963, a 3-month window, the CIA installs telephone wiretaps on 2 American journalists working out of Washington, D.C. The internal code name is Project Mockingbird, and the reason is that somebody inside the Kennedy administration is leaking classified material, and the agency's been asked to find the source. But the targets of the wiretaps aren't the leakers. The targets are the journalists themselves. And the CIA, by its own founding charter, isn't legally allowed to be doing this kind of surveillance on US soil, no matter who the target is or what they're doing. Item number 3, H.T. Lingual. Now, beginning in 1953, the same year Dwight Eisenhower is sworn in as president, and continuing for 20 straight years until 1973, every piece of mail coming from the United States going to the Soviet Union and every piece of mail coming back gets opened and photographed by CIA officers working out of a sorting facility at JFK Airport in New York. 20 years without a warrant in direct violation of federal law. How about item number 4? Operation Chaos. Domestic surveillance of American anti-war groups by an agency that's statutorily prohibited from operating against American citizens on American soil. The agency does it anyway, and by the time Chaos is shut down, files have been compiled on 9,900 Americans, their politics, their phone calls, their bedroom partners. Many of them aren't even activists. They're college students who attended a single rally. They're wives of activists, children of activists, 9,900 American citizens, none of them charged with a crime. Item number 5, you may be familiar with this one. We did a full episode on MK Ultra, Frank Olson, Deep Creek Lodge, the Statler Hotel incident. Check it out if you get a chance. The file contains what we documented in that episode. Here's a detail that didn't make it into the earlier video. The records of MK Ultra were ordered destroyed by outgoing DCI Richard Helms in early 1973, the same year that the inventory got ordered. Only 7 boxes survived the purge, and those 7 boxes contained enough material to confirm everything. Item 6, a Soviet KGB officer named Yuri Nosenko defects to the United States in 1964. He's then held by CIA in solitary confinement for 3.5 years. 3.5 years in a windowless concrete cell. He's repeatedly interrogated, repeatedly drugged, he's sleep deprived, no legal representation, no access to anyone outside the building. The man who orders the detention is the agency's counterintelligence chief, James Jesus Angleton, who convinced that Nosenko is a Soviet plant. Turns out he's not. He's eventually released, paid an undisclosed sum, and given a new identity inside the United States. Remember that name, James Angleton. He's coming back. Item 7, the Watergate burglars. Now, 5 of the 7 men arrested in the Democratic National Committee headquarters at Watergate Hotel on June 17, 1972, were former CIA-trained Cuban-American operatives from JM Wave, the agency's anti-Castro Miami station that we walked through in our Operation 40 episode. Check that out if you get a chance. The CIA didn't order Watergate, but it created the men who did. And there are 11 more categories. The dosing of citizens, the detention of citizens, the wiretapping of citizens, the reading of citizens' mail, break-ins at the homes of former officers, surveillance of journalists, programs the agency was never legally allowed to run, and it ran for decades anyway. By the spring of 1974, the entire file sits inside a safe in Colby's office. Colby is now director of the Central Intelligence Agency. He was sworn in September 4th, 1973, and the question of what to do with the documents falls entirely to him. He can bury them, he can disclose them quietly to a select committee, or he can let them go public. He chooses to sit with them for 14 months. December 22nd, 1974, Sunday morning. The New York Times runs an above-the-front page story by investigative reporter Seymour Hersh. The opening sentence: the Central Intelligence Agency, directly violating its charter, conducted a massive illegal domestic intelligence operation during the Nixon administration against anti-war movement and other dissident groups in the United States. Now, Hersh has the goods. He's got chaos, he's got the 9,900 files, he's got the record. America wakes up to read it over Sunday coffee. The most secretive institution in the federal government just got its pants pulled down on the front page of the paper of record. Did Colby leak the story to Hersh? In a public letter to Washington Star 4 years later, Colby flatly denies it. He writes, "I did not leak the so-called family jewels to Seymour Hersh of the New York Times." But then he concedes this: Hersh came to me before publication with a much exaggerated account of these past events. It was clear to me that he was going to publish the story, so I tried to bring him down to a more accurate perspective, and I gave him no material that he didn't already have. So Colby didn't hand Hersh the documents, but he confirmed enough of what Hersh said to make sure the story ran. Now, that's not what you do if you want a story killed. Now, in his memoir, Colby is clearer about why. He made a deliberate decision to cooperate with Congress and the press to save the institution from being destroyed entirely. His framing was, if we don't cooperate, the CIA is going to be destroyed. 8 months later, September 16, 1975, Washington, D.C., the Senate caucus room. Now, Colby walks in carrying a black leather case. He sits down in front of the church committee, cameras flashing across the room, senators on a raised dais looking down at him. He places a case on the table and opens it. Inside, a stainless steel pistol shaped like a regular .22 caliber handgun, but heavily modified. A dart sits on the barrel. Next to it is a small glass vial holding 11 grams of shellfish toxin. It's enough biological poison to unalive several million human beings. And another vial containing 8 milligrams of cobra venom. Now, 5 years earlier, President Richard Nixon ordered the agency to destroy all biological weapons in its possession. Now, the director of the CIA just walked into the United States Senate on live national television and admitted that the agency disobeyed. In his memoir, Colby describes what happened in his own words. "I unwittingly handed the committee a corker on a silver plate." The word he uses to describe handing a US senator enough biological poison to unalive a major American city, it's a corker. Colby testifies for 7 hours that day. He admits the mafia plots, he admits chaos, he admits the mail intercepts, he admits the dart gun. Then he goes back to Langley. That night, half the CIA calls William Colby a traitor, the other half calls him the only thing that saved them from extinction. James Angleton, the man we just met, the man who held Nosenko in a cell for 3 years, starts a whisper campaign inside the building. His message: Colby is a Soviet mole, and the first of the threatening letters starts arriving at Colby's home. March 7, 1975, a 3-page typewritten letter is dropped into a U.S. Postal Service mailbox in Jersey City, New Jersey, postmarked code 073. Remington Rand Pica-typed, spaced 10 letters to the inch, electric machine, addressed to Mr. William Colby, Central Intelligence Agency, Washington, D.C. Page 1 opens with this: Mr. Colby, the evil truth about your... The pages that follow walk through grievances about capitalism, democracy, the American way, and what people like Colby have been doing to all of them. The closing line: you may open a file on me. And the letter is signed with a name that the writer doesn't bother to hide. By the spring of 1975, the FBI's mail intake on Colby has grown into a stack so thick that it needs its own file series. Some letters are political diatribes, some are physical threats. A few are credible enough that the Bureau opens individual background workups on the senders. And on April 2, 1975, an assistant U.S. attorney for the District of New Jersey reviews the Jersey City letter and applicable federal statutes. He concludes that the writer's lack of actual intention to carry out those threats makes successful prosecution unlikely. That means the letter's bad, just not bad enough to file charges over. So prosecution is declined, and the letter goes in the file. The next one shows up a few days later. So what's actually happening in 1975 that's generating this kind of mail? There's a name for what 1975 becomes in American history: the Year of Intelligence. That's the cover line. That's what 1975 becomes in the American consciousness. The year that the United States government finally stops covering for the CIA, and the public finally gets to see what's being done in its name. 3 separate federal investigations open within 8 weeks of each other. Investigation number 1, the Rockefeller Commission. January 4th, 1975, President Gerald Ford, less than 6 months into his presidency after Nixon's resignation, signs Executive Order 11828, establishing the United States President's Commission on CIA Activities within the United States. It's chaired by Vice President Nelson Rockefeller. Its mandate? Investigate the domestic activities exposed by Seymour Hersh the previous December. The Rockefeller Commission is Ford's attempt to control the damage, put a sitting vice president in charge, limit the scope, issue controlled reports, move on. It doesn't work. Investigation 2, the Church Committee. January 27, 1975. The United States Senate forms its own committee, chaired by Senator Frank Church of Idaho. This is the body Colby walks into 8 months later with a dart gun. The Church Committee's mandate is broader. Every U.S. intelligence agency, every covert operation, every assassination plot, every illegality going back to the agency's founding in 1947. 150 staff investigators, 800 subpoenaed witnesses, 14 volumes of public hearings, and 7 volumes of classified findings before they're done. Investigation 3, the Pike Committee. February 19, 1975, the House of Representatives establishes its own Intelligence Committee. It's chaired by Otis Pike, congressman from New York. Now, where Rockefeller is cautious and Church is methodical, Pike is hostile. Pike believes the CIA should be dismantled. His committee subpoenas the agency's internal budget, its operational files, its intelligence failures going back to the 1968 Tet Offensive, the 1973 Yom Kippur War, the 1974 Portuguese Revolution. When the CIA refuses to hand over documents on the Yom Kippur War, Pike does something no congressional committee has ever done before. He threatens to charge a sitting director of intelligence with contempt of Congress. Pike issues a public statement that if Colby doesn't comply, the committee will, quote, ask the full House to hold him in contempt. Now, that's never happened to a sitting CIA director before or since. So 3 investigations, one from each branch of the federal government, and they're all aimed at the same director at the same time. And it gets worse. December 1974, a few weeks after the Hersh story breaks, Colby makes a decision that ends 20 years of agency history. He forces James Angleton, the counterintelligence chief from the last segment, to retire. Angleton's been at the agency since 1947. He helped found it. He ran counterintelligence for 20 years, hunting Soviet moles inside the building. Now, half the operations officers consider him a paranoid wreck. The other half consider him the only thing standing between the United States and a Soviet penetration of American intelligence. Colby tells him it's time to go, and Angleton walks out of Langley carrying 2 cardboard boxes, files he claims as personal effects, photographs, and papers. And that night, the whisper campaigns begin. Angleton starts telling people who will listen that William Colby has been a KGB asset for 30 years. Now, 0 documents, 0 evidence, just his own conviction developed in the same paranoid years where he held a Soviet defector in solitary confinement for 3.5 years. But the whispers spread, and by the summer of 1975, half the operations division at Langley considers their own director compromised. And while all this is happening, October 1977, 2 years past the year we're covering, former director Richard Helms, the man whose 1973 destruction of the MK Ultra records came up last segment, pleads no contest to perjury charges. It's for lying to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee about the CIA's role in destabilizing the elected government in Chile. Helms is the most senior CIA officer in American history to be convicted of a crime in a U.S. court. He gets a 2-year suspended sentence and a $2,000 fine. His old agency colleagues applaud him in the courthouse gallery as the verdict comes down. He tells reporters on the courthouse steps that he'll wear the conviction as a badge of honor. Now, if it were you or me, we'd be hanged for treason. The agency gets its own rules. Back in 1975, inside the Ford White House, the man most determined to remove William Colby is Secretary of State Henry Kissinger. Kissinger's been a presence in every major covert operation Colby's been involved with for the past 5 years. The 1973 Chilean coup, the 1974 invasion of Cyprus, the collapse of South Vietnam. Kissinger believes Colby is volunteering too much to Congress. He's hurting the institution. He's making the United States look weak abroad to Soviet eyes. Kissinger wants Colby gone. He has 2 allies inside the White House that's willing to execute it. Donald Rumsfeld, Ford's chief of staff, and Rumsfeld's deputy, a 34-year-old named Richard B. Cheney. Together, they have a candidate to replace him. a 51-year-old former Texas congressman currently serving as the U.S. ambassador to China. His name's George Herbert Walker Bush. Sunday, November 2nd, 1975, President Ford summons William Colby to the Oval Office on a Sunday morning. The only sitting director of the CIA in American history to be removed in person on a weekend. The meeting's brief. Ford thanks him for his service, tells him he's nominating George Bush as the new director. That same day, across the rest of the cabinet, the president fires James Schlesinger as Secretary of Defense. He strips Henry Kissinger of his National Security Advisor portfolio. He elevates Donald Rumsfeld to Secretary of Defense. He elevates Dick Cheney to Chief of Staff. And he drops Nelson Rockefeller from the 1976 ticket. It happens on a single Sunday in a single afternoon. The press calls it the Halloween Massacre. It's the largest single-day reshuffling of the United States cabinet in modern American history. And the man at the center of it, the man whose disclosure of the family jewels triggered the whole chain of dominoes? William Colby. Colby stays on through Bush's Senate confirmation hearings, briefs his successor through mid-January of 1976. His official last day inside Langley is January 30th, 1976. He's 56 years old. He's out of work for the first time since 1943, and the most dangerous case in his life is still 12 years ahead of him. July 11th, 1990, 6:30 in the morning, a 4-seat Piper Saratoga single-engine private aircraft. It taxis onto the runway at Aurora Municipal Airport west of Chicago, Illinois. The pilot is a 41-year-old former lieutenant in the Nebraska State Patrol named Gary Caradori. He spent the previous day in Chicago meeting with sources for the largest investigation of his career, a multi-year inquiry by the Nebraska State Legislature into a financial scandal and an alleged child trafficking ring operating out of Omaha. Now in the backseat, Caradori's 8-year-old son Andrew, called AJ by his family. Now Caradori's wife asked him not to bring AJ on this trip. She told him that she didn't like the work he was doing. She felt it was getting dangerous. Caradori told him that he'd be right back. He flies an instrument flight plan to Lincoln, Nebraska. The estimated time of arrival is 10:15 a.m. Central Daylight Time. The aircraft lifts off at 6:39 a.m., and 7 minutes into the flight, around 7,800 feet over Illinois cornfields, the plane breaks apart mid-air. The right wing shears off. The cabin and the tail sections spiral to the ground, and pieces of the Piper scatter across square miles of farmland. Gary Caradori and his 8-year-old son die instantly. Curiously, less than 2 weeks earlier, Caradori told colleagues he had photographic evidence that was going to, quote, blow the entire case wide open. No pun intended. The photographs were never recovered. Now, I have a number of questions. First, who is Gary Caradori, and what was this case he was talking about? For that, we got to go back 20 months. November 4th, 1988, Omaha, Nebraska. Federal agents from the FBI and the Internal Revenue Service execute a search warrant on the offices of a small credit union in the north part of the city, the Franklin Community Federal Credit Union. It serves predominantly low-income families in North Omaha. Within hours of that raid, the doors are locked and the assets are frozen. Federal auditors eventually determine that approximately $40 million is missing from the credit union's books. The man at the center of this investigation is a credit union manager, a 44-year-old businessman named Lawrence E. King Jr. Larry is politically connected. He throws lavish parties at his home in Washington, D.C. He charters private jets. He moves in circles that include senior political party donors, federal officers, federal officials, and people with top security clearances. When the FBI search is complete on November 4th, King is on a plane out of Omaha. It's a straightforward embezzlement case, but what happens next is not. Within weeks of the Franklin raid, a Nebraska state senator named Loran Schmidt starts taking phone calls from parents, from social workers, from at least 2 psychiatrists. The calls share a common element. Children are naming Lawrence King, but not for embezzlement, for something else. The state legislature opens a formal investigation. They create the Franklin Committee. It's a subcommittee with subpoena power tasked with looking into possible criminal activity by Larry King beyond the credit union fraud. The committee's vice chairman is a state senator from Lincoln. He's a Vietnam veteran and a lawyer. His name's John DeCamp. DeCamp doesn't come into the Franklin case as a stranger to intelligence work. He served in Vietnam during the Phoenix years as a young cords officer. He reported up the chain to a CIA station chief he respected named William Egan Colby. In early 1990, when the Franklin Committee starts producing depositions from children describing flights to Washington, parties in private homes, encounters with named federal officials, DeCamp picks up the phone and calls Colby. He needs help. He doesn't know who he can trust inside Nebraska. He doesn't know who in Washington he could trust either. He needs someone with intelligence experience, with contacts in the Bureau of Prisons, and the major law enforcement embezzlement networks to help him figure out what exactly he's dealing with. Colby agrees to consult on the case. He's 70 years old. He's still practicing law in Washington. He's technically retired from intelligence work, has no operational reason to take the case, takes it anyway. Spring 1990, the Franklin Committee retains Gary Caradori as lead investigator. Now, over the next 4 months, Caradori conducts what eventually becomes 81 hours of videotaped depositions with 4 alleged victims, young men and women in their teens and their early 20s who describe being trafficked as minors to Washington and other cities involving named federal officials. The names in the depositions are explosive. Now, we're not going to repeat them here. We covered some of the related ground in our Johnny Gosh and the Finders episode. Check them out if you want the full disclosure on the trafficking allegations. But the significance to this episode, Caradori takes the depositions, he puts them on videotape, and he starts independently corroborating the children's claims with travel records and financial records, and a particular set of photographs he says that he obtained from a contact close to King's inner circle. In late June 1990, Caradori tells the Franklin Committee chairman that those photographs are about to change the case. He says the same thing to his investigative partner. He says it to one of the senators on the committee. He even tells his wife. 13 days later, he's dead in an Illinois cornfield with his 8-year-old son. The National Transportation Safety Board investigated the crash. The aircraft is recovered in 3 major pieces and dozens of smaller ones. NTSB analysts examine the wreckage for evidence of mechanical failure, weather, fuel contamination, structural fatigue. The official cause of the crash, it's recorded as, quote, in-flight breakup of undetermined origin. Got that? The photographs Caradori claimed to have, plus the investigation notes, plus his briefcase, none of it is ever recovered, purportedly. The Franklin Committee continues working, but the wind goes out of it. In October 1990, a Douglas County grand jury returns a verdict that shocks both sides of the investigation. It calls the entire case a carefully crafted hoax. It actually indicts 2 of the alleged victims, young women in their late teens, for perjury. Both perjury convictions are later overturned by the appellate courts, but the public record has been written. In 1992, John DeCamp publishes a book called The Franklin Cover-Up. The book accuses senior federal officials, political donors, clergy, Nebraska law enforcement, all of running a child trafficking network out of Omaha and Washington for over a decade. The book's cover features an endorsement from William Colby. Colby calls the book a remarkable record of an extremely diverse and bizarre criminal conspiracy. That's the former director of the CIA going on the public record, endorsing a state senator's accusation of organized child trafficking involving named federal officials. In 1994, Yorkshire Television in the United Kingdom completes production of a documentary called Conspiracy of Silence, and it's based on the Franklin Committee evidence and the Caradori's videotaped depositions. The documentary is scheduled to air on the Discovery Channel in the United States in May of 1994. Now, 48 hours before it goes to air, the Discovery Channel cancels the broadcast. The documentary never airs in the United States in its original form. In Conspiracy of Silence, in his only on-camera appearance speaking about the Franklin case, is a 74-year-old former director of Central Intelligence named William Colby. Truth is truly stranger than fiction. By early 1996, Colby's been working the Franklin file for around 6 years. He's 76 years old. He's been communicating with the United States Department of Justice. He's pushing for a federal investigation that the Bureau, under multiple administrations, has refused to open. Per DeCamp's account, in late March 1996, Colby writes a personal letter to Attorney General Janet Reno asking her to open up a federal investigation into the Franklin matter, and also to provide protection for several individuals who, in Colby's judgment, are in physical danger. The letter is dated March 27, 1996. He mails it from Washington. And weeks before that letter, Colby pulls John DeCamp aside. DeCamp later writes that Colby looked at him seriously and said, "You have to consider the possibility of some danger not only to your reputation, but to your person." In the expanded 1996 edition of his book, DeCamp tallies what he considers a list of suspicious deaths connected to the people who came into the orbit of the Franklin case. By DeCamp's count, 15 individuals, including witnesses, investigators, alleged victims, and people who claim to know what happened. Now, we're not going to walk that list here. Again, the Gosh episode or our Finders episode covers most of that trafficking ground in detail. But the man at the top of DeCamp's list, 6 weeks after mailing the letter to Janet Reno, William Colby, he's dead. Coincidence? I think not. Summer 1996, Washington, D.C. A 56-year-old American investigative journalist sits in his apartment off Connecticut Avenue going through a stack of personal correspondences. His name's Zaylen Grant. Grant served in Vietnam as a U.S. Army intelligence officer, speaks fluent Vietnamese. He left the military and covered the rest of the war as a correspondent for Time Life and the New Republic. After Vietnam, Grant becomes one of the few American journalists who can call senior CIA officers by their first names. One of those officers was William Colby. The two men were writing to each other for years. Letters about the Phoenix program, about the family jewels, about Franklin. Per Grant's later account, the last letter arrives in April of 1996. In it, Colby tells Grant he believes he's being watched. And about 2 weeks after his body comes out of the river, the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner of Maryland files its final report. Cause of death, drowning and hypothermia following a cardiovascular incident. Manner, accident. Case closed. Grant doesn't accept it. He drives to Maryland in June 1996. He interviews the sheriff who responded to the call. He interviews the neighbor who first noticed the empty cottage. He even interviews the dive team that pulled out the body. And then he makes a request that no other journalist makes successfully. Through Sally Colby, the widow, Grant requests access to the official autopsy photographs. And he gets it. He becomes the only journalist in the United States to view the autopsy photographs of William Colby. And what Grant sees in those photographs is a problem. A body in the cold water for that long should be in a state of advanced decomposition. The skin should be loose, the features unrecognizable. The gases of decomposition should have produced what forensic pathologists call bloating. The body in the photographs isn't bloated. The skin is firm. The features are clearly recognizable. This is consistent with being a matter of hours in the water, not days. Grant interviews 3 forensic pathologists independently, shows them the photographs without identifying the subject, and all 3 agree in the same range. The body in the photographs was in the water somewhere between 8 and 24 hours before recovery. Now that's significant. Then there's the stomach. The autopsy report records partially digested food in Colby's stomach at the time of death. Food in the type and quantity consistent with a meal eaten 1 or 2 hours earlier. The plate on the dinner table was the meal he was eating when whatever happened happened. So if his stomach contents are accurate, he died approximately 1 to 2 hours after sitting down to that dinner, which puts the death somewhere around 8:30 p.m. on Saturday, April 27, 1996. Now in April in southern Maryland, official sunset that night was 7:50 p.m. By 8:30 p.m., it was dark. By 9 p.m., it was pitch black on the river. The official narrative is that William Colby, 76-year-old, in dress clothes, in 48-degree weather, took a canoe out alone on a wide tidal river in pitch darkness without a life vest, and then had a cardiovascular event in the boat that caused him to fall in. Got that? Does that pass the smell test for you? Grant publishes his investigation in 2002 in a long-form piece called Who Murdered the CIA Chief? His thesis is that Colby was killed at the cottage, probably between 7:30 and 8:30 p.m. Saturday, by 2 or 3 men who knew his routine. The body was held overnight. The canoe was launched and swamped the next morning. The body was placed in the water sometime in the early hours of April 28th to create the appearance of an accidental drowning. Grant points to what stayed inside the cottage: the wallet on the dinner table, the glasses next to it, the shoes by the door. Nobody heads out for an evening paddle and leaves all that behind, unless somebody else staged the scene. Now there's a parallel here that's worth noting before we wrap this up. September 24th, 1978, Chesapeake Bay, Maryland, roughly 80 miles north of Rock Point. 55-year-old retired CIA officer named John Arthur Paisley takes his 31-foot sloop out for a solo weekend sail. Now, Paisley was the deputy director of the CIA's Office of Strategic Research, the unit responsible for analyzing Soviet military capability. He retired from the agency in 1974, but he'd been working as a consultant on Soviet intelligence matters, including the Nosenko bona fide analysis. He was scheduled to testify before the Senate committee in October 1978 about Soviet penetration of the CIA. He never makes it to the testimony. His sloop is found drifting and unmanned the next morning. Now, 8 days later, on October 1st, his body surfaces near the mouth of the Patuxent River. Coroner's findings: a 9mm bullet wound behind the left ear, 38 pounds of diver's weights attached to the body, and the official ruling: suicide. Right. The Paisley case was investigated for years by a different journalist named Joseph Trento. Trento documented 14 separate inconsistencies with the suicide ruling. The ruling has never been changed. Put the two cases side by side. CIA insider on the water alone, body recovered days later, physical evidence that doesn't match the official case, key testimony or disclosure pending at the time of death. The cases match. Paisley 1978, Colby 1996, 18 years apart. In 2013, the historian Randall Woods publishes the definitive biography of William Colby. The book is called Shadow Warrior. It runs 565 pages, and it's the most thoroughly researched account of Colby's life ever produced. In an interview about that book, Woods says this on the record, quote, "I cannot prove that he was murdered, but it was very suspicious. He was missing for a week, and his body wasn't decomposed. He had a lot of enemies, and he did a lot of things that I don't know about." That's Colby's official biographer with access to family papers, agency contracts, and over a decade of primary research. He's saying he can't prove murder, but he can't rule it out either. The state of Maryland never reopens the case. The Department of Justice never opens a federal investigation into Colby's death. The CIA never publicly comments on the matter. And as of the recording of this video, the official ruling remains an unfortunate accident. So back to our original question. Who was William Egan Colby? The hero of Operation Ripe, who jumped into occupied Norway, snow up to his knees? The lawyer in Stockholm who built a secret army inside a neutral country? The Catholic from St. Paul, Minnesota who learned how to overthrow elections from a desk in Rome? The architect of Operation Phoenix who testified to Congress about 20,587 deaths? The man who walked into the Senate caucus room with a black case full of biological poison and burned the agency to save it? The 70-year-old lawyer who took John DeCamp's phone call and spent the last 6 years of his life trying to expose what the Justice Department wouldn't? Or the 76-year-old man face down in the river who maybe paddled out alone on a cold night in April? Maybe he didn't. The state of Maryland says accident. The Central Intelligence Agency says accident. The Department of Justice says accident. Zaylen Grant says murder. Randall Woods says suspicious. John DeCamp says he was warned weeks before that exactly this would happen. You decide what kind of accident produces a body that doesn't decompose for 9 days, a dinner half eaten, a wallet on the table, a screen door unlocked, and a canoe gone. You tell me. I'm John Genoa. This is America's Strangest History. Thanks for watching.